Dawn breaks over the stone archway, and the city gate groans open. A line of carts and travelers stretches into the misty distance, all waiting for one man. He is the gate tax collector, a figure of immense and quiet power, often overlooked by history. His world is one of coin, quiet conflict, and whispered conspiracies happening every single day at the ancient threshold. By the end of this, you will understand the secret mechanisms that kept a medieval city alive, seen through the eyes of its most crucial and mysterious official. We will uncover how a simple toll could hide a web of espionage, and why the money collected at dawn paid for the safety of the walls at dusk. What hidden power do you think a person in such an ordinary role truly held? Every coin dropped into the collector's leather pouch had a name and a purpose. This was not a single tax, but a collection of duties as specific as the stones in the city wall. A cart rumbling over the wooden bridge just inside paid pontage, a fee dedicated solely to the maintenance of that vital crossing. The same cart, as it passed the towering gatehouse, contributed murage, a direct tax for the building and repair of the defensive walls themselves, and once inside, if its wheels rolled onto the newly laid cobbles of the market square, the merchant might owe pavage, a toll for the very streets beneath them. This was the brilliant, practical logic of the medieval funding system. The city's most essential services were paid for directly by those who used them most. But what filled that leather purse? It was a vast and varied inventory of daily life. A wealthy merchant's wagon, laden with sacks of fine English wool or barrels of French wine, would be assessed a heavy duty, a significant source of revenue for the crown and the city. Yet the system was equally interested in the small-scale commerce of the common folk. A farmer's wife bringing a basket of eggs to sell at market would have a single egg taken as her toll. A woodsman with a bundle of firewood on his back would surrender 1 or 2 sticks. Every single item of value that crossed that threshold was subject to assessment, from bolts of Flemish cloth to sacks of grain, from live chickens to blocks of salt. This constant trickling stream of commerce, meticulously documented and taxed, was the lifeblood of the city. The walls you walked upon, the bridge you crossed, the very street beneath your feet, were all paid for by the eggs, the firewood, and the wool that passed through that gate under the watchful eye of the collector. His day began long before the first cart arrived, with the heavy, metallic groan of ancient locks turning. The gatekeeper and the collector worked in silent unison, heaving the massive iron-banded oak doors inward to greet the dawn. A line of travelers and merchants, already stretching back into the misty fields, shifted in anticipation. This was the moment the city opened for business, and he was its first and most critical transaction. For the next 12 hours, there was no respite, only the constant, demanding flow of human traffic. His mind became a ledger, his eyes a set of scales, assessing everything from the quality of a merchant's silks to the weight of a farmer's grain sack. Each assessment required instant mental calculation, a negotiation of value and toll that could not afford delay. Behind him, on a small wooden desk, sat the true record of his day, the great ledger. Its pages were a dense tapestry of scratches and symbols, a coded language of commerce. He did not write 1 wagon of wool. He made a specific mark for wool, another for the wagon, and a number denoting the assessed duty. A basket of eggs received a simple circle, while a barrel of wine was marked with a distinct, wavy line. This was not just record-keeping, it was a high-stakes memory system designed for speed and accuracy under relentless pressure. The physical toll was just as immense. He stood for hours on cold stone, his fingers growing numb from counting coins and making marks. The air around him was a perpetual chorus of animal sounds, cart wheels on cobbles, and the mingled voices of a dozen languages, all vying for his attention. A misstep, A moment of misplaced trust, and the city's revenue suffered. He had to spot the hidden compartment in a merchant's cart, or the false bottom in a barrel claimed to be full of cheap fish but actually concealing expensive spices. His focus was a fortress wall, and the tide of people was a constant assault upon it. Finally, as the sun dipped below the western wall, the last cart would rattle through. The great gates would swing shut with a definitive thud, locking out the world, but his day was not over. In the flickering light of a single candle, the real accounting began. He would empty the heavy leather pouch, the collective weight of the city's daily life, onto his desk. The clatter of silver pennies, halfpennies, and farthings filled the silent gatehouse. He would count it all, stacking coins into precise piles, cross-referencing each stack with the cryptic marks in his ledger. Only when every mark had its corresponding coin, when the city's financial heartbeat for the day was confirmed, could he finally rest. This was not a job, it was an endurance of the mind and body, a daily marathon whose finish line was the silence of a balanced book. His tools were an extension of his authority, each one designed for a specific and vital purpose. The first thing you would notice was the wax tablet, a small wooden frame filled with dark beeswax hanging from his belt. This was his temporary memory, a reusable slate for jotting down quick counts or provisional sums as carts rolled through. With a stylus, he could scratch numbers and marks into the wax, and with a quick sweep of his thumb, the surface was smoothed clean for the next transaction. It was the tool of immediacy, of a mind constantly processing information under pressure. Once a transaction was complete and the toll paid, that information was transferred to its permanent home, the great ledger. This was no ordinary book. Its covers were thick, worn wood, often bound with iron straps for strength. Its pages, made of durable parchment, were filled with that cryptic language of marks and symbols, a testament to the day's commerce. This ledger was the ultimate legal record, the undeniable proof of what the city was owed and what it had received. Its weight was not just physical, it was the weight of accountability. Then came the scales, a beautiful and precise instrument of brass. These were not for weighing coins, but for assessing the goods themselves. A merchant might claim his sack of pepper was only half full, but the scales would tell the true story. The collector would carefully place certified weights on one side and the merchant's goods on the other, the balance beam hovering until it found its equilibrium. This simple act of measurement prevented countless arguments and ensured the city received every penny it was due. Finally, there was the strongbox. This was the final destination for the day's takings, a heavy, iron-bound chest with a lock that was a masterpiece of medieval metalwork. It was more than a box, it was a statement. Its sheer physical presence communicated security and permanence. Throughout the day, coins would be dropped into the leather pouch, but at regular intervals, or for any particularly large payment, they would be transferred to this formidable chest, which was often kept within a small, locked room inside the gatehouse or under the watchful eye of a guard. The strongbox was the end of the journey for the city's lifeblood, a temporary fortress for its wealth until the official accounting could begin. Each tool, from the humble wax tablet to the imposing strongbox, played a role in a perfectly designed system of trust, verification, and security. Who were the men entrusted with this daily flood of coin and commerce? They were rarely high-born nobles who viewed such work as beneath their station. Instead, the role of tax collector was often filled by burghers, literate townsmen who had earned a measure of wealth and respect through trade or craft. Some were minor officials appointed directly by the city council or the crown, their positions secured by a reputation for sharp wits and unwavering honesty. In other cases, the role was a family trade, passed from father to son, creating dynasties of gatekeepers who knew the city's rhythms better than anyone. This placed them in a uniquely precarious social position. They stood squarely on the middle ground, a narrow and often uncomfortable ledge between two worlds. To the common folk waiting in line, the collector was a figure of authority, a representative of the powerful city government who held the power to ease or complicate their day with the stroke of a pen. He was part of the system and therefore viewed with a mixture of resentment and wary dependence. Yet, to the true ruling class, the wealthy merchants and landed gentry, he was merely a functionary, a civil servant whose meticulous work, while essential, did not grant him entry into their halls or their social circles. His power was real but sharply confined to the stone archway of his gate. He had to be stern enough to command respect from a surly cart driver, yet deferential enough to avoid offending a rich merchant who might have the ear of the mayor. Every day was a performance, a careful balancing act of asserting authority without overstepping his station. This constant social tension defined his life, making him both a guardian of the city's wealth and a permanent outsider to the very power structures he helped fund. The leather pouch at his belt was not just heavy with metal, it was heavy with complexity. While silver pennies were the official currency of the realm, the reality at the gate was a messy, vibrant ecosystem of value. A merchant from Florence might proffer a gold florin, its intricate stamp a promise of purity from a distant mint. A trader from the Hanseatic League would offer a thick silver groschen, its weight and composition familiar across northern Europe. The collector had to be a master of numismatics, instantly recognizing the worth of a dozen different coinages and calculating their value against the local standard. His scales were not just for goods, they were often for the coins themselves, weighing suspect pieces to ensure they hadn't been shaved or clipped by unscrupulous hands. Counterfeiting was a constant threat, a silent war fought with lead-filled coins and clever forgeries. A single bad coin accepted into the city's treasury could undermine trust in the entire monetary system, making his sharp eye the first line of defense for the economy itself. But coin was not always king. What happened when a farmer arrived with a cartload of turnips, but not a single penny to his name? The system, in its practical wisdom, allowed for barter. The collector might accept a portion of the turnips themselves, their value carefully assessed, to be added to the city's stores or sold later. A skilled craftsman without goods to trade might offer his labor instead, promising a day's work repairing a section of the wall in lieu of a cash payment. This flexibility kept the lifeblood of the city flowing, ensuring that essential food and services could still enter even when hard currency was scarce. Perhaps the most fascinating economic tool was the extension of credit. For a well-known merchant with a long history of punctual payments, the collector might simply make a mark in his ledger, an IOU that allowed the merchant to pass without immediate payment. This was not mere kindness, it was a calculated risk that wove a powerful web of debt and obligation. That merchant was now bound to the city and to the collector by a thread of trust and financial duty. He would settle his account at the week's end, but in that moment of granted passage, the gate was more than a physical barrier, it was a nexus of social and economic relationships where the promise of future payment was as solid as the silver in the strongbox. That same leather pouch, heavy with the city's trust, could also be a vessel for its deepest betrayals. The gate was a place of immense temptation where a man's honesty was tested with every single transaction. For some collectors, the lure of easy wealth proved too strong. The methods of fraud were as varied as the goods passing through the gate. A collector could simply underreport his daily collections. He might mark in his ledger that he received only 10 pennies for a rich merchant's wagon, when in truth he collected 15, pocketing the difference with no one the wiser. Or he might accept a quiet bribe, a silver coin slipped into his palm alongside the official toll. in exchange for looking the other way as a merchant's undervalued goods passed through untaxed. More brazen still was the invention of wholly fictitious tolls. A collector could stop a farmer and demand a new wall walking fee or a gate cleaning tax, charges that existed nowhere in the city's laws but lined his own pockets through sheer intimidation. The system's reliance on his solitary judgment created a perfect breeding ground for such corruption, yet the city was not blind to these dangers. The risk of discovery was ever present, and the consequences were brutally severe. A collector caught embezzling funds faced not just dismissal, but life-altering punishment. He could be subjected to crippling fines, stripping him of all his property and leaving his family destitute. Imprisonment in a dank, rat-infested dungeon was a common fate, a slow death sentence for a man who had once held the keys to the city. In the most extreme cases, the punishment was physical mutilation. A hand that had stolen from the public purse might be publicly amputated, a permanent and grotesque advertisement of the price of betrayal. This was not mere cruelty, it was a calculated deterrent. In a world without modern surveillance, the fear of horrific retribution was the primary check on greed. The collector lived with this duality every day, balancing the weight of silver in his palm against the terrifying weight of the law. His position, perched between two worlds, now included a precipice overlooking ruin, a constant reminder that the power to open the gate also included the power to seal his own fate. He was never truly alone in his stone archway. While history often paints him as a solitary figure, the collector operated at the center of a small, vital team. The most visible members were the city guards, their presence a silent language of authority. Standing with their polearms, they were the muscle that backed the collector's decisions, a deterrent to anyone considering a violent refusal to pay. Their stern faces and imposing stance ensured that negotiations over tolls remained just that, negotiations, not robberies, but their role was more nuanced than simple intimidation. A guard's sharp eyes might spot a familiar face in the crowd, a known smuggler who had tried to slip contraband through a different gate the week before. A subtle nod from the guard to the collector was all it took to flag that cart for a more thorough inspection. Their knowledge of the criminal underworld was as crucial as their strength. Then there was the scribe, often a younger man apprenticing in the ways of civic administration. Perched at a small desk just inside the gate, his quill was a frantic instrument, scratching out the details the collector could not pause to record. While the collector used his wax tablet for quick calculations, he would call out completed transactions to the scribe, who entered them into the great ledger with more elaborate script. This division of labor was a simple but brilliant check and balance. The scribe's record was an independent verification of the collector's work, a second set of eyes ensuring that what was collected matched what was written down, making casual embezzlement far more difficult. But the most intriguing parts of this network were the informal ones, the web of informants who saw the gate not as a barrier, but as an opportunity. A tavern keeper near the city walls might send a boy running to the collector with a whispered message, tipping him off that a particular merchant, known for his wealth, was finishing his breakfast and would be at the gate shortly. This was not an act of civic duty so much as a business arrangement, with the boy receiving a small coin for his trouble, or a friendly farmer, waiting in line with his produce, might casually mention the cart ahead of him, noting how its wheels dug deeply into the mud, suggesting a hidden, heavy load. These tiny fragments of information, gathered from the city's everyday life, gave the collector a form of foresight. He was not just reacting to what was in front of him, he was anticipating it, prepared for the wealthy traveler who could bear a higher toll or the smuggler trying to conceal silks beneath a layer of common hay. This network transformed the gate from a passive checkpoint into an intelligent filter. its effectiveness built on a foundation of shared interest, mutual profit, and a deep, collective understanding of the city's secret rhythms. For every rule the collector enforced, a dozen schemes were devised to break it. The city gate was a grand stage for a daily performance of deception, where smugglers transformed ordinary objects into ingenious hiding places. A merchant's cart, seemingly laden with humble hay, might conceal a fortune in fine silk or silver plate nestled within a false compartment built into the floor. The wheels themselves could be hollowed out, their wooden spokes packed with precious spices. Even a common barrel was a potential puzzle box. A cooper, paid handsomely by a smuggler, could craft a barrel with a secret inner chamber, its outer portion filled with cheap salted fish, while the core held delicate porcelain or leather bags of coin. The collector's sharp ear was as important as his sharp eye. He learned to listen for the telltale sounds of deceit, the dull thud of a solid wheel that should have been hollow, or the sloshing of a liquid that did not match the viscosity of the declared wine. His hands, too, became instruments of detection, probing sacks of grain to feel for the hard edges of hidden goods, or testing the weight of a barrel to see if it felt unnaturally heavy for its contents. This was a high-stakes game of perception, where the smuggler's art of concealment was perpetually tested against the collector's science of revelation. When the cover of daylight proved too risky, the cover of darkness offered another path. The city walls, while formidable, were not an unbroken line of constant vigilance. Under the moonless sky, figures moved like ghosts through the surrounding fields. They knew the locations where the wall was lowest, or where a recent rainstorm had eroded the base enough to allow a person to squirm underneath. A quiet stretch of the river that ran through the city's defenses could become a liquid highway, with small, silent boats poling their way past sleeping sentries. These nocturnal operators were not just lone wolves, they relied on complex signals. A dim lantern flashed from a specific house outside the walls could indicate that the coast was clear, while the hoot of an owl, repeated at a precise interval, was a signal to proceed. The collector and his guards knew these tactics, of course. Their nightly patrols were not random walks, but targeted responses to this silent threat, their own lanterns cutting through the fog as they searched for the scuff marks in the mud or the snapped twig that betrayed a recent, illicit passage. But the most corrosive threat to the city's treasury was not the smuggler in the dark, but the corrupt hand in the light. For the right price, a guard could suddenly develop a blind spot. He might be the one to flash the all-clear signal from the battlements, or to take an unusually long walk to the far end of his patrol route, creating a perfect window for a loaded cart to roll through a supposedly secured postern gate. These arrangements were whispers, sealed not with a handshake but with a subtle exchange, a coin left on a specific windowsill, or a promise of a share of the profits later. This internal betrayal was the most difficult to root out, for it turned the city's own defenses against itself. The collector, therefore, was not just fighting the schemers outside his gate, he was constantly gauging the loyalty of the men standing beside him. Every day was a new puzzle, a fresh attempt to outsmart the endless ingenuity of human greed, proving that the strongest walls could be compromised not by force, but by a single, well-placed bribe. Every day demanded a new performance from the man at the gate. He wore a mask of stone-faced impartiality, a carefully crafted persona designed to project absolute authority. To the nervous farmer with a single chicken to declare, he offered the same measured, unreadable expression as he did to the wealthy merchant boasting of his silks. This was not his true self, but a role he had to play, a shield against the chaos of human emotion and the constant pressure to bend the rules. The performance was his primary tool, a psychological barrier more potent than any guard. A flicker of uncertainty, A moment of visible hesitation and his credibility could shatter, inviting a cascade of challenges from everyone in the line. He cultivated a reputation for being unshakable, a man whose decisions were as fixed and predictable as the rising sun. This facade of cold efficiency was his only defense against the pleas and the threats that defined his long days. Behind the mask, however, was a man navigating a torrent of private judgments and hidden dangers. A mother with 3 young children, her face etched with exhaustion, might plead for leniency on the toll for her meager basket of apples. His heart might ache for her, but to show public mercy was to invite a dozen similar pleas, undermining the entire system of fixed tolls. He had to bury his sympathy beneath the weight of his duty, offering only a curt, by-the-book refusal. The opposite pressure was just as constant. A belligerent cart driver, his arms thick with the muscle of a hard life, might lean in close, his voice a low growl threatening trouble if the toll was not reduced. In that moment, the collector stood entirely alone, his mind racing. Did he hold his ground, risking a physical confrontation that could halt all commerce, or did he capitulate to keep the peace, knowing it would be seen as weakness by the next person in line? His performance had to absorb these blows without flinching. He learned to de-escalate with a calm, firm tone, or to subtly signal a guard with a slight shift of his weight, all while maintaining the unblinking stare of a man in complete control. This relentless psychological balancing act, the constant suppression of his own humanity in service to the city's laws, was the most exhausting tax of all. It was a toll collected not in coin, but in silent stress, a price paid from his own soul to maintain the fragile order of the threshold. The great ledger's pages hold more than faded ink, they hold echoes of the city's forgotten pulse. On the page for the feast day of St. Michael, the marks tell a frantic story. The usual trickle of carts is replaced by a flood of simple circles and walking staff symbols, each one a pilgrim. For 3 days, the collector's hand must have ached, recording hundreds of these humble travelers, their tolls a single penny each. The city's revenue would have swelled, not from wealthy merchants, but from the collective devotion of the common folk, their footsteps and their small coins transforming the gate into a river of faith and commerce. Then, a week later, the script changes entirely. A single, elaborate entry dominates the page, a series of symbols denoting horses, fine cloth, and armed men. This was the retinue of a foreign ambassador, a traveling court of 24 people. The collector noted the duty on their silks and spices, but he also made a special mark next to the entry for their guards' weaponry, likely a notation that these men were exempt from the usual tax on arms due to their diplomatic status. This single line in the ledger reveals a moment of high politics and careful protocol, all filtered through the collector's meticulous pen, but sometimes the most revealing entries are the quiet anomalies. On an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, the ledger shows a familiar merchant, a man named Klaus, who regularly brought in heavy loads of iron ore. This time, however, the mark for his wagon is accompanied by a symbol for a greatly reduced weight and a curious annotation, a small cross. The toll paid was minuscule. Was Klaus' mind failing? Or was this the collector's coded way of noting a suspicion that the wagon, famously light load, suggested a hidden compartment, its true cargo smuggled through elsewhere the night before? That tiny cross is a silent question mark in the margins of history, a ghost of a confrontation or a clever deception that we can no longer fully decipher. These are not just accounts, they are the city's diary. The ledger records the panic of a bad harvest in the influx of cheap grain from a neighboring region, and it captures the blossoming of a new trade route in the sudden appearance of exotic nuts and dyes previously unseen. Each page is a snapshot of a living, breathing community, its emergencies and its prosperities, all witnessed from the one man who stood at the crossroads of it all. The weight of that leather pouch made him a target every single day. While the city slept behind its walls, the collector and his strongbox represented a portable fortune, a treasure chest with only a few men standing between it and the ambitions of the desperate or the greedy. Organized criminal gangs, often composed of demobilized soldiers or hardened outlaws, saw the gatehouse not as a barrier, but as a prize. Their attacks were not impulsive, they were calculated assaults. They would case the gate for days, learning the guards' patrol patterns, noting the exact time the strongbox was moved for the nightly accounting. An ambush might be sprung on a lonely stretch of road as the collector traveled to the treasury, or a coordinated diversion could be created at the main gate, a staged brawl or a fire to draw the guards away just long enough for the strongbox to be snatched. The collector's life was a constant calculation of risk, his journey home a tense, watchful trek through shadows that seemed to hold a threat in every doorway. But the danger was not only from professional thieves. A disgruntled individual, a man who felt a tax had unfairly broken him, could be just as lethal. Imagine the carter who had his last valuable possession, a prized breeding sow, taken as a toll. Humiliated and enraged, he might return not for the money, but for revenge, armed with a cudgel and a burning need for retribution. The collector's seemingly small, daily judgments could accumulate into a tide of resentment that threatened to drown him. For every person who accepted his authority, another secretly plotted to make him pay for it. The city understood this perpetual state of siege. Protection was therefore a multi-layered defense. The collector himself was often permitted, or even required, to wear a dagger or a short sword, a last line of personal defense. The strongbox was not just heavy, it was a masterpiece of security, featuring complex locks that required two separate keys to open, one held by the collector and the other by a city treasurer, ensuring no single person could access the contents alone. The most crucial layer, however, was the human shield. Guards were not just for show, they were a dedicated escort for the collector and the strongbox, especially during the vulnerable transition from the gatehouse to the more secure city hall or castle treasury. These men were chosen for their loyalty and toughness, forming a moving wall of muscle and steel around the most valuable cargo in the city. Yet even with all these precautions, the collector walked through his life with a unique kind of awareness, knowing that his role made him a marked man, his daily harvest of coins sowing the seeds of potential violence that could sprout at any moment. His most valuable currency was not silver, but information. While his ledger meticulously tracked the flow of goods, his mind became a living archive of whispers, rumors, and vital news carried by every traveler who passed his station. The merchant from Bruges did not just pay a toll on his cloth, he also carried the latest price of wool in Flanders, a critical piece of intelligence for the city's own merchants. The pilgrim returning from Rome brought tales of a new papal decree that could shift the political winds across Europe. Even the common foot soldier, discharged from a distant war, was a walking report on troop movements and the stability of a rival lord's domain. The collector's gate was the city's sensory organ, its ear pressed to the world outside the walls. He learned to listen not just for deception in a merchant's story, but for truth in a traveler's casual gossip. A mention of rising bread prices in a neighboring town could signal an impending shortage, allowing the city council to stockpile grain before panic set in. A whispered account of plague spreading along a major trade route was more valuable than a chest of gold, giving the city a precious head start to close its gates and enact quarantine measures, potentially saving thousands of lives. This transformed his role from a simple financier into a crucial, if unofficial, spy. At the end of each day, his duties did not always end with the accounting of coins. He was often expected to appear before a city alderman or the mayor's chamberlain to deliver a verbal report. He would relay everything he had heard, sifting the trivial chatter from the strategically vital. Did the Hanseatic merchant seem nervous, perhaps hinting at new tariffs that could disrupt the cloth trade? Was the courier from the king's court unusually hurried, suggesting urgent political developments? The collector's neutral, observant position made him the perfect intelligence filter. He was trusted precisely because he was not a noble with his own political ambitions, but a functionary whose loyalty was to the smooth operation of the city itself. His sharp ear and discretion became a silent, unrecorded tax that every traveler paid, one that funded the city's foresight and secured its survival in a dangerous and unpredictable world. His official duties ended when the strongbox was locked, but his social obligations were just beginning. The collector was woven into the fabric of the town in ways that went far beyond his ledger. He was expected to be a visible, respectable figure at public functions, from the annual guild feast to the mayor's Saints' Day celebration. His attendance was not optional, it was a required performance of his station, a way to maintain the delicate social bonds that made his daily work possible. At these gatherings, he was not a powerful authority, but a man navigating a complex web of favors and expectations. The wealthy merchant who had paid a hefty toll that morning might now clap him on the back, offering a cup of wine while subtly inquiring if his brother's shipment of timber, due next week, might receive a slightly more favorable assessment. The collector had to smile, accept the drink, and navigate the request without ever explicitly promising anything. A direct refusal could create a powerful enemy, but a clear agreement would be a betrayal of his office. His entire social life became a continuous, unspoken negotiation. He was constantly balancing the city's rigid laws against the town's fluid human relationships. Granting a small favor, like overlooking a minor discrepancy for a well-respected baker, could earn him a lifetime of loyalty and the occasional free loaf of bread for his family. Yet that same act, if discovered by the wrong person, could be twisted into evidence of corruption. He lived in a world where a handshake in a tavern carried the weight of a contract, and a conversation in the churchyard after Mass was as binding as an entry in his ledger. This intricate dance defined his existence. He was both inside and outside the community, a man trusted with its wealth, but never fully allowed to forget that he served at its pleasure. Every decision at the gate rippled through his personal life, and every friendship came with a potential price. The stone archway was not just a civic boundary, it was a spiritual one too, where the authority of the city council met the immense power of the church. This collision of sacred and secular worlds played out daily under the collector's watchful eye. A line of monks, their habits dusty from the road, would approach the gate not with coins in hand, but with a carefully worded parchment. This document, sealed with the bishop's own insignia, granted them full exemption from all tolls. For the collector, this was a direct order from a higher power, one he dared not challenge. He would bow his head respectfully and wave them through, the city's lost revenue a silent offering to divine authority. The same exemption applied to wagons laden with sacramental wine, stone for a new cathedral, or relics destined for the high altar. These were not mere goods, they were holy cargo, and taxing them was seen as an affront to God himself. This created a constant, low-level tension. The city's coffers bled a little with every exempted cleric and every untaxed barrel of communion wine, a financial sacrifice demanded by faith. This friction could erupt into open conflict. A proud bishop, accustomed to deference, might arrive with a retinue so large and laden with personal luxuries that the collector would grow suspicious. Were those fine silks and spices truly for the church's use, or for the bishop's own table? Questioning this blurred line was a dangerous game. The collector risked not only a stern rebuke from his own civic superiors, who feared the church's political wrath, but also the threat of excommunication, a spiritual death sentence that cut him off from the community and his own salvation. In these moments, the gate became a battleground of jurisdiction, where a lowly official had to gauge the limits of both his civic duty and his mortal soul. Yet the church was also a source of strength and sanctification for the gate itself. A small stone niche carved into the gatehouse often held a statue of the city's patron saint, their stone eyes watching over the comings and goings. Before taking an oath, a merchant or a traveler would be required to place their hand on a Bible or a holy relic kept at the gate, swearing to the truth of their declaration. This sacred theater was crucial for enforcing honesty in a world without paper records or instant verification. A lie told over a holy book was not just a lie to the collector, it was a lie to God, with damning consequences for eternity. The gate was thus a place of profound duality, where the church could simultaneously deprive the city of funds and yet provide the moral framework that made collection possible, a paradox the collector navigated with every toll he did and did not collect. The city's bustling gate could fall silent in an instant, its purpose twisted from commerce to containment. When word arrived of the Black Death creeping along the trade routes, the collector's duty transformed overnight. He was no longer just a financial guardian, he became the city's first and most critical line of defense against an invisible enemy. The ledger and the scales were set aside, replaced by a new and terrifying tool, the bill of health. Every traveler, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest pilgrim, was now required to present this document, a stamped parchment certifying they had come from a region free of the pestilence. A traveler without this paper, or one bearing the seal of a plague-stricken town, was not simply taxed, he was turned away absolutely. The collector's gate became a barrier of life and death, his pen a weapon against a microscopic invader. The emotional toll of this work was staggering. He had to look into the eyes of a desperate family, their belongings piled on a single cart, and deny them entry, knowing full well he might be sending them back to a certain and horrible death. There was no room for mercy in the protocol, for a single moment of weakness could doom the entire population behind the walls. He enforced quarantines with grim determination, directing travelers who seemed healthy but came from suspicious regions to makeshift camps outside the walls, where they were required to wait for 40 days, the dreaded quarantina, to prove they carried no sickness. And through it all, he faced his own mortality with every breath he took. Standing at the portal, he was exposed to every cough, every feverish glance, from the thousands of people he interacted with. He breathed the same air, handled the same documents, and stood just feet away from death's doorway, all while trying to project an aura of unshakable control to prevent the panic that could shatter the city's social order. His life became a calculated gamble, a daily risk taken not for coin, but for the survival of his entire community. But on the feast day of St. John, all the meticulous rules of the gate were swept away by a human tide. The city flung its gates wide open, declaring a temporary truce with commerce itself. For 3 glorious days, the usual tolls were suspended, an invitation to the world to come and spend. The single line of carts became a tangled, shouting, laughing mob of humanity, a river of commerce so thick you could walk across the carts from one side of the road to the other. The collector and his team were no longer assessing individual wagons, they were trying to manage a force of nature. Their role shifted from precise calculation to crowd control, their voices growing hoarse from shouting directions and their bodies pressed on all sides by the surge. This was not a day for the great ledger, it was a day for survival, for preventing the festival from turning into a fatal crush right at the city's entrance. The financial loss from waived tolls was a calculated gamble. The city fathers knew that the sheer volume of visitors would pour far more money into the taverns, inns, and market stalls than they ever collected at the gate. The collector's job was to keep that golden river flowing, not to dam it up with bureaucracy, Yet even in this chaos, opportunity bloomed. While standard tolls were gone, the collector gained a new, temporary power, the authority to levy special impromptu fees. A troupe of acrobats with a dancing bear, they would be charged an entertainment tax before they could even set up their stage in the square. A merchant from the east with a caged leopard, a wonder most locals had only heard of in tales, would pay a hefty premium for the privilege of displaying such a marvel. The collector had to think on his feet, his mind racing to invent fair value for novelties he had never seen before, all while keeping the human current moving. It was an exhausting, exhilarating dance, a brief season where the gatekeeper became the carnival master, and the city's wealth was measured not in single coins, but in the roaring, vibrant, overwhelming life of the crowd. The stone archway you walked through was a masterpiece of psychological and physical control. Its design was a silent sermon on power, meant to impress and intimidate from the moment you approached. Towering over you was the massive portcullis, a grid of iron-tipped oak beams suspended in the shadowy gate passage. It was a visible promise of imprisonment, a cage that could slam down in an instant, trapping the dishonest or the dangerous inside the stone throat of the gateway. Above your head, the ceiling was punctuated by murder holes, small, square openings that seemed innocent until you looked closer. From these openings, defenders could pour boiling water, hot sand, or heavy stones directly onto anyone trapped below, turning the entryway into a killing box. Every architectural feature whispered a single, uncompromising message: you are entering on our terms, yet woven seamlessly into this fortress was the machinery of commerce. Built into the thick wall of the gate passage itself was a small, heavily barred window, the collector's station. He did not stand vulnerably in the open road, he operated from within the stone, protected yet omnipresent. Travelers would approach this window to declare their goods and pay their toll, their faces illuminated by the dim light from within, while his remained shadowed and authoritative. This was the first and most crucial transaction, conducted through a barrier that established his safety and their submission. Once a payment was made, the real treasure did not stay at the window. Just behind that public-facing station, accessible only through a low, reinforced door, was the counting room. This was the heart of the financial operation, a space so secure it felt like a vault. The room was small, with walls of bare, cold stone several feet thick. A single, narrow slit of a window, high up on the wall, provided the only outside light and a sliver of air. In the center sat a sturdy wooden table, its surface worn smooth by the daily piles of coin. This is where the collector and his scribe would retreat throughout the day, transferring the contents of the leather pouch to the iron-bound strongbox, their quiet counting a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The room's design served two masters, defense and accounting. Its seclusion prevented prying eyes from ever seeing the full tally of the day's wealth, and its sturdy construction made it a final redoubt, a safe within the safe of the gatehouse itself. The architecture ensured that the lifeblood of the city could be counted in peace, shielded by the very same stones that were paid for by the coins now stacked upon the table. Behind the collector's every decision lay the unyielding weight of written law. His authority did not flow from his own judgment, but from a dense tapestry of statutes and royal decrees that spelled out his duties with meticulous, often tedious, precision. The most famous of these was the Magna Carta, that great charter of liberties sealed by King John in 1215. While it is remembered for curbing the power of the crown, it also contained a crucial clause directly affecting the man at the gate. It forbade the king's officials from imposing arbitrary tolls on merchants, stating that all goods should be liable only to the ancient and rightful customs. This single sentence was a shield for merchants and a shackle for the collector, binding him to a system of established, predictable fees. He could not invent a new tax on the spot. no matter how rich a merchant appeared. His power had firm and ancient limits, but the Magna Carta was a distant, lofty document. The rules that truly governed his daily life were the local city ordinances, scrolls of parchment kept in the mayor's strongbox and read aloud in the town square each year. These ordinances were breathtakingly specific. They did not simply state that fish was taxed, they detailed the exact toll for a barrel of herring versus a crate of cod, and specified a different rate for smoked fish than for fresh. The law dictated the precise hours the gate was to be open, from sunrise to sunset, with heavy fines for any collector who opened late or closed early without just cause. It named the specific coins he was permitted to accept and the official rates of exchange for foreign currency. Every single aspect of his role, from the percentage of value taken from a bolt of silk to the procedure for confiscating goods from a debtor, was codified in ink and law. This legal framework was what separated his work from simple extortion. When a merchant challenged a toll, the collector could point not to his own whim, but to a specific line in the civic statutes. This written code was the bedrock of his legitimacy, transforming him from a man with a pouch into an agent of the city's sovereign will. It was a system designed for transparency, yet its complexity also created a labyrinth where only he, the full-time professional, could truly navigate the twists and turns. His expertise in these ordinances was a form of power in itself, a deep knowledge of the rules that made the city and its gate function. That leather pouch dictated the rhythm of life for an entire household. The collector's work did not end when he stepped away from the gate. It simply moved indoors, where his family became the unseen support staff for his critical civic role. His wife was far more than a homemaker. She was often the unofficial deputy treasurer. In the quiet of the evening, while he tallied the physical coins, she might sit with him, her own sharp mind scanning the ledger entries for inconsistencies he was too weary to spot. She was the keeper of the household's complex social ledger, remembering which merchant's family had sent a gift at Christmas or which local official's daughter was getting married, navigating the subtle politics that could smooth her husband's path at the gate the next day. Her management of the home's finances was a mirror of his own work, ensuring that the city's wages were stretched to cover their needs, their social obligations, and their savings against a sudden dismissal or accusation. Their son's future was often mapped out before he could even read. From a young age, the boy would be brought to the gate, not to work, but to watch. He learned through silent observation, his eyes tracing the movements of his father's hands as they counted coins, his ears absorbing the specific cadence used to address a nobleman versus a farmer. This was his true schooling. He learned the secret language of the ledger's symbols not from a book, but by watching his father's stylus dance across the wax tablet and then the parchment. He was taught to recognize the subtle differences in coinage by feel and by sound long before he was trusted to handle them. This apprenticeship was a birthright and a burden, a guaranteed trade that came with the heavy expectation of continuing the family's hard-won position. The entire household's security, its social standing, and its very sustenance were tied directly to the daily flow of commerce through that stone archway. A slow market day meant a leaner meal on the table. An accusation of corruption against the father meant social ruin for the wife and diminished marriage prospects for the children. They lived the reality that the city's financial health was not an abstraction. It was the bread they ate and the roof over their heads, all filtered through the tired hands of the man who came home each night smelling of dust, ink, and cold metal. The weight of a single coin could feel heavier than the entire strongbox when it came from a beggar's hand. Each day presented the collector with a gallery of human hardship, testing the rigid rules of his office against the undeniable reality of suffering. A family huddled in a broken-down cart, their faces hollow with hunger, would present a meager bundle of rags as their sole worldly goods. The law was clear: every item of value was subject to toll. But what value could be assigned to desperation? The collector held a quiet, unofficial power in these moments, the discretion to show mercy. He could choose to wave the family through with a sympathetic nod, marking a 0 in his ledger next to their entry. This act of compassion was a personal risk, a tiny rebellion against the city's statutes. If a superior noticed a pattern of such leniency, he could be accused of dereliction of duty, his kindness twisted into evidence of a soft heart unfit for the hard demands of the office. Yet to demand a toll from those who had nothing was to take the very clothes from their backs or the last crust of bread from their children's mouths. The emotional calculus was relentless. Was he upholding the law, or was he upholding a cruelty? A mother clutching a feverish child, her eyes pleading for swift passage to a healer inside the walls, presented another kind of dilemma. The law might demand a toll for a person, but every moment of delay increased the child's peril. Could he, in good conscience, stand there and demand a coin while a life hung in the balance? His decision in that instant was a measure of his soul, a private verdict on whether the city's revenue was more sacred than its humanity. This discretionary power made him a judge of more than goods. He became a judge of need, his silent verdicts written not in the ledger, but in the relieved sighs of those he helped and the resentful glares of those he turned away. He walked a razor's edge, knowing that for every soul he aided, another watched and wondered why they were not shown the same grace, his small acts of mercy sowing the seeds of perceived injustice. The gate was not just a checkpoint for commerce, but a weighing station for the human heart, where the price of compassion was forever balanced against the gold of duty. The city gate was far more than a pile of stones and timber. It was a powerful idea made manifest. Medieval people saw it as a sacred boundary, a razor-thin line separating the known world of law and faith from the untamed wilderness of danger and chaos. On one side lay the ordered streets, the watchful church, and the king's peace. On the other stretched the dark forests, the lawless roads, and the lurking unknown. The collector stood directly upon this psychological frontier, his daily work a ritual of purification that kept the wild at bay. His ledger was not just an account book, it was a charm against disorder. Every coin he collected was a tribute paid for the privilege of entering the circle of safety, a symbolic offering that reinforced the city's sovereignty over the unpredictable world outside. The common folk viewed him not just as a civil servant, but as a guardian of this threshold, a figure whose authority bordered on the mystical. He was the one who decided what, and who, was permitted to cross from the realm of chaos into the realm of order. This perception wrapped his role in a cloak of superstition. A traveler might surreptitiously touch a lucky amulet as they approached his window, a silent plea for his favor. A merchant, after paying his toll, might make the sign of the cross, not in piety, but as a ward against the collector's perceived power to bless or blight a venture with his mood. If he appeared stern, it was a bad omen for the day's business. If he offered a rare smile, it was taken as a sign of divine approval. This was why his mask of impartiality was so vital. It was the unreadable face of fate itself. He held the keys not merely to a physical gate, but to the very concept of safety, and in the medieval mind, that made him a keeper of ancient, almost magical, rites. The final clang of the great gate echoed into silence, leaving only the whisper of settling dust. His long day was not over, for now began the most sacred ritual of his office, the nightly reckoning. In the small, windowless counting room, the air thick with the scent of old stone and cold wax, he would empty the heavy leather pouch onto the worn wooden table. A river of silver pennies, halfpennies, and farthings cascaded forth, a chaotic jumble of the city's economic life. His first task was to bring order to this metallic chaos, sorting the coins into neat stacks by type and mint, his fingers moving with a practiced, weary rhythm. Each stack represented a different strand of the day's commerce, a physical tally of the promises and payments made at his window. Then came the moment of truth, the reconciliation. He opened the great ledger to the day's page, its cryptic symbols now a map of this scattered treasure. His eyes darted between the parchment and the piles of coin, his mind performing a final, critical calculation. Every mark for a wagon of wool, every circle for a basket of eggs, had to find its match in the silver on the table. A single penny missing, a single entry unexplained, and the entire day's work was cast into doubt. This was a test of his own honesty and accuracy, a silent, solitary trial held every evening under the flickering candlelight. When the sums finally aligned, when the last coin found its home in the ledger's story, a profound relief would wash over him. The city's financial heartbeat for the day was confirmed, strong and steady, but his responsibility did not end with a balanced book. The coins were then carefully transferred to the iron-bound strongbox, each clink of metal against metal a sound of finality. He and the designated guard would then lift the heavy chest, its weight a tangible proof of his day's labor, and begin the most vulnerable journey of all, the short walk through the dark, quiet streets to the city treasury. This was the handover, a formal transaction conducted in hushed tones with the Knight Chamberlain. The strongbox was opened, the coins were counted once more in the Chamberlain's presence, and a receipt was stamped and signed. Only when that parchment was safely in his hand, a legal release from his immense burden, could he truly consider his duty done. In that moment, he passed the city's wealth back to its keepers, his own part in the great machine complete until the dawn. That final receipt signed by the Chamberlain was not an ending, but a link in a chain that stretches unbroken across the centuries. The fundamental principles of that medieval gatehouse are alive and well today, governing our own movements and transactions in ways both visible and unseen. Think of the modern highway toll booth, a gleaming, automated version of the stone archway. You slow your car, you pay a fee, and that revenue is directly earmarked for the maintenance of the very roads you are traveling, a direct echo of the medieval murage tax that paid for the walls. The collector in his booth, or the transponder on your windshield, serves the same purpose as the man with the wax tablet, facilitating passage and funding infrastructure through a direct user fee. On a larger scale, the customs officer at an international airport or seaport is the direct descendant of our medieval official. They stand at the national threshold, inspecting goods, assessing duties, and controlling what enters the economic bloodstream of the country. Their ledger is now a digital screen, their scales calibrated with laser precision, but their core mission remains unchanged: to protect local markets and collect revenue for the sovereign power, just as the collector protected his city's economy from undervalued imports. Even the seemingly free expanse of the digital world operates on these ancient rules. The paywall you encounter on a news website is a virtual gatekeeper. It allows you to sample a few articles, the digital equivalent of glimpsing the city's spires from afar, but to gain full access to the valuable content inside, you must pay a toll. Your monthly subscription fee is the pavage tax for the information highway, funding the creation and maintenance of the very content you consume. This is not a coincidence, it is the enduring logic of controlled access. Whether the barrier is made of stone, asphalt, or code, societies have always devised systems to make the user pay for the privilege of passage, for the security of a walled space, or for the value of curated information. The methods have evolved from leather pouches to credit card chips, but the essential transaction, the quiet exchange of coin for access, has remained a constant heartbeat of civilization for 1,000 years. His world was a paradox of power, a life spent counting pennies while wielding the authority of a king at the city gates, this man was never just a tax collector, he was a banker managing the city's daily cash flow, a guard defending its economic borders, a spy gathering intelligence from every traveler, and a social negotiator balancing law against human need. His story reveals a profound truth about the medieval world. Its survival depended not only on knights and kings, but on the unsung officials who managed the quiet, constant transactions of daily life. The next time you walk through an ancient archway or pay a modern toll, remember the hidden history in that simple act. Consider the countless forgotten figures who stood in those same spots, their lives a complex web of duty, risk, and quiet calculation. What other everyday roles from history do you think hold secrets just as fascinating? Share your thoughts in the comments below.